So I think in general, people are becoming much more aware of self-knowledge and of mindfulness and looking inside themselves nowadays. And I read recently about Google employee number 107, Chade Meng Tan, I think his name is, who started some courses at Google on mindfulness and self-knowledge, basically. And these were very, very well oversubscribed, in fact, very popular. And he's since apparently written a book about this. And at Google headquarters, they have these screens, and on one of the screens, there's a huge globe turning round, and all the places where people are Googling at that moment, the streams of light going out into black space. And then there's another screen with all the things that people are searching for, all the subjects coming up constantly all over the world. So there's this fantastic sort of interconnectedness between all the people in the world searching for something. But this course which Chade Meng Tan has devised is called Search Inside Yourself. So this is in fact I haven't read this book that's subsequently been written about with this title, but I did look up on Google, Search Inside Yourself, Google, and came up with this information. And somebody called John Kabat-Zinn, who's probably a lot of you know from mindfulness, he's one of the major exponents for bringing Buddhist-based mindfulness meditation into the health service, which has now spread to England too. And he says in his foreword to this book, together these displays impart a moving and very visceral sense of the interconnectedness of our world, akin to the emotional impact of seeing for the first time the image of the earth in the blackness of space taken from the moon. So the question is, what are we all searching for? And what are the signs indicating to us? And this is something that will come up with reference to Ibn Arabi's writing in this talk. So for those of you not familiar with Ibn Arabi's work, he was a poet, mystic, philosopher who was born in southern Spain in 1165 at a time when the land the Arabs called Al-Andalus had already been under Muslim rule for about 450 years. He's one of the world's most profound thinkers, known in the Islamic world as Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest master. And as the prominent scholar of Islamic studies and comparative religion at George Washington University, Professor Said Hussein Nasr has said, it would not be an exaggeration to say that Ibn Arabi is the most influential intellectual figure in the Islamic world during the past 7 centuries, if the whole world is considered. His ideas spread from the West, where he was born, throughout Africa and the Middle East, where he traveled, writing and teaching all the time, and eventually spread as far as Persia, India, and China. In the last 40 years or so, his works become a lot better known in the West, and that's mainly due to the universality of his thought. He's best known for his explanation of the oneness of being and for his writings on human perfection, and that is what it means to be a complete, balanced, and integrated human being. Although we won't be focusing on his other ideas today, he's also becoming very well known in the West for his ideas on the imagination, the imaginative world, which is between the abstract intellectual world, and how those ideas, if you like, come into manifestation in the sensible world. So between the abstract, spiritual, intellectual, and the world of the senses, he talks a lot about this world of imagination between the two. And also he's very well known for his writings on non-fixity of belief, which obviously has great relevance for us in today's world. So this emphasis on non-fixity of belief arises through knowledge and is motivated by love. And as you'll have seen on the posters advertising these sessions, there's a poem here by Ibn Arabi at the top where he says, "I follow the religion of love. Whatever way love's camels take, that is my religion and my faith." So in this way, Ibn Arabi forms a bridge between Islam and the West. For Muslims, he brings out the true meaning of the religion, whilst at the same time adhering closely to the Quran and to the practices of the Prophet. Whilst for the whole of humanity, in general, he brings out universal truths and gives practical advice towards living an integrated life, both inner life and an outer life. So, as we've said, Ibn Arabi was born in Murcia in Spain in 1165, and he moved to Seville when he was about 8 years old. And it was when he was a young man, quite young, that he first felt a calling to return to God, in other words, to search for what his life really means, to search for the reality, to come to know, to want to come to know to true and direct knowledge. And he had a dream vision which brought this about, where he met the three major prophets of the Abrahamic religions. That's the religions stemming back to Abraham, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And this was a really key moment in his life. And he says, "My return to the way was accomplished through a dream vision under the guidance of Jesus, Moses, and Muhammad. Jesus encouraged me towards asceticism and ridding myself of unnecessary belongings, baggage. Moses predicted I would obtain the special knowledge known only to God. That's the ilm laduni, possessed by the mysterious guide Khidr. And Muhammad commanded, my beloved, hang on to me and you will be safe." So this seminal vision, where he meets these prophets of the three major religions, stemming from Abraham, indicates the breadth of Ibn Arabi's thought, which examines the meanings of the message brought by the prophets of all these traditions, since he was born into a culture where, despite constant skirmishes, Christians, Jews, and Muslims have been living together in relative harmony for hundreds of years. After this vision, Ibn Arabi studied all the religious and other sciences of his time and sat with many sheikhs and spiritual teachers, some of them women. He began to teach and write, and he travelled throughout Andalusia and North Africa and had countless spiritual experiences. Then about halfway through his life in the year 1200, he left Andalusia definitively and travelled east to go on the pilgrimage to Mecca. Whilst he was in Mecca, Ibn Arabi again received many spiritual openings, which he eventually set down in writing in his monumental work, the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, or Meccan Revelations. And he also wrote the Ruh al-Quds in 1203 in defense of the Sufis of Andalusia. And there is a book, lovely little stories about the Sufis of Andalusia, which is published in English by Beshara Publications. It was also in Mecca that he met the beautiful Nizam, the daughter of the keeper of the sanctuary of Abraham, who was the inspiration for his famous book of poetry, the Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, or the Interpreter of Ardent Desires, which was first published in England in 1910. And Sarah's mentioned a little bit about the link between Ibn Arabi and the Persian poet Jalaluddin Rumi, who some of you heard about in the last session. And I'm sure probably most of you have heard of him, even if you didn't come to the session, because he's been a best-selling poet in America for more than 25 years, so he is becoming quite well known, whereas Ibn Arabi is still becoming better known in the West, really, although he's very well known throughout the Islamic world, as we've said. So Ibn Arabi, when he was in Mecca, met somebody called Majduddin, that's Majduddin Ishaq bin Yusuf al-Rumi, who was a spiritual guide in his own right, and he was very close to the kings of Anatolia at that time. And Anatolia is in modern-day Turkey. And Ibn Arabi accompanied his friend Majduddin via Iraq back to Konya in Anatolia. And later, after the death of his friend Majduddin, Ibn Arabi married his widow, and he brought up his young son, Sadruddin al-Konawi, that's Sadruddin of Konya, as his own son, and took great care of his education. And Sadruddin was later very instrumental in the dissemination of Ibn Arabi's teachings. So there was this great friendship and mutual respect between Sadruddin al-Konawi, whose dates were 1207 to 1274, and his contemporary Jalaluddin Rumi, whose dates are 1207 to 1273. So you see they were exactly the same age, and both teaching in a fairly small town. In fact, Rumi used to go along to the mosque where Sadruddin al-Konawi was the imam, and then he later became more of a teacher in his own right. But when Rumi died, he requested that Sadruddin al-Konawi would read the funeral prayer when he was dying. He asked for him to read the funeral prayer at his funeral. So it just gives an indication of the closeness between these two very spiritual men. And also, there must be some crossover of ideas which Sadruddin had received from his stepfather, Ibn Arabi, which then obviously passed through to Rumi and were also expressed to a certain extent in his poetry. So there is a very definite link between the two. So Ibn Arabi has sometimes been hailed as the pinnacle of the way of knowledge, and Rumi as the pinnacle of love. But as Henri Corbin, who has written about Ibn Arabi in Creative Imagination, has pointed out, both are inspired by the same theophanic sentiment, the same nostalgia for beauty, and the same revelation of love. Ibn Arabi continued to travel extensively, writing prolifically and teaching widely, and eventually he settled in Damascus in 1223. A few years later, he had a vision where he was handed a book, and this is the book of the Fusus al-Hikam, or the Ringstones of Wisdom, by the Prophet Muhammad. And he was told, take it and bring it out to the people so that they might benefit from it. Ibn Arabi remained based in Damascus until his death in 1240. But his whole life was a spiritual journey in search of union with the divine beloved. And he ultimately wrote, my journey was only in myself, and it was to myself that I had been guided. In all, Ibn Arabi wrote more than 300 books, of which about 93 have survived to the present day. As we've already mentioned, he's most famous for his teachings on the oneness of being, his explanation of how a single reality is revealed in every level of existence as an outpouring of love, which is the movement of beauty. He emphasizes the necessity of seeing with two eyes, the eye of transcendence in order to perceive what is essential, single, incomparable, and abstract, and the eye of imminence in order to see that oneness in all its intricate detail, in all the intricate detail of its manifold forms, representations, and likenesses, so that both the one in the many and the one can be perceived. Oneness of being affirms that God, who is the one and only being, is essentially one in spirit, even though he is referred to by many names, displays a plurality of attributes, and is evident in the multiplicity of actions. God's most beautiful names are the means by which he reveals himself to us in the world. Just as each of us as a human being is a single person, yet we're called by many names, we display lots of different qualities, and we act in all kinds of ways. Other people only know our secret self by what we show them through the qualities of our words and actions. Beautiful singing. So God is manifest. Can you hear over there with the singing? Yeah. So God is manifested in the world and known to us through the world, because the world is nothing other than God revealing himself in different images. Ibn Arabi frequently quotes the divine saying, "I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known, so I created the world in order to be known." This love to be known imbues the whole of creation. And of course, God already knows everything because his knowledge is absolute, and that means it includes everything. But nothing is left out, but it is beyond and more than everything that we know. And God wants to see his own beauty revealed in the mirror, which summarizes the whole of existence. Because as Ibn Arabi says at the beginning of the chapter on Adam in his book, the Fusus al-Hikam, the vision of a thing by itself is not the same as the vision of itself in another, which serves as a mirror for it. Ibn Arabi writes elsewhere, the Prophet reported that God created Adam, that Adam represents humanity, in his image, and the human being brings together the whole world. God's knowledge of the world is none other than his knowledge of himself, since there is nothing in being but he. Inevitably, the world is according to his form. When God made the world manifest as a particularized entity, it was his place of revelation. So he saw nothing within it but his own beauty, and he loved the beauty. Therefore, the world is God's beauty, and he is God's beauty, and he is the beautiful, the lover of beauty. Anyone who loves the world in this way has loved it with God's love, and has loved nothing but God's beauty. For the beauty of the work is not ascribed to itself, it is ascribed only to the artist. So the beauty of the world is God's beauty. This brings us to the second teaching that Ibn Arabi is most famous for, and relevant to us today in terms of exploring what it is to be human, which is that of the perfect, complete, or universal human being. This is the potential for each human being to serve as that perfect mirror for reality, free of any additional flaw, colouring, or distortion of their own making. According to Ibn Arabi, the human being who is made in the image of God is created for perfection, and his writings are full of advice on how to realize the true potential which each human being has for wholeness and completion. He affirms that it is the heart of the human being that serves as a mirror, and which is able to perceive directly. And with regard to the saying of the Prophet Muhammad, "Whoever knows their self knows their Lord," Ibn Arabi says in his chapter in the Fusus on the wisdom of the heart, in their discussions about the self and what it is, none of the speculative thinkers and the theologians has discovered its reality, for this can never be obtained by speculative thought. Anyone who seeks this knowledge by means of reasoning and thought is trying to do something impossible. Whoever seeks to achieve something by means of something other than its own way will never succeed. So the kind of knowledge that Ibn Arabi is talking about in his explanation of the saying, "Whoever knows their self knows their Lord," is the knowledge of the heart. The person whose heart is pure does not oblige reality to conform to their own image of it, but rather their heart is able to receive and conform to reality as it truly appears at that moment. He writes, "The one who has a heart knows the variation of the real in images by virtue of the heart's variability. So from their self they know the real self, their self being no other than the itselfness of the real. There is nothing existing in the world which is other than the itselfness of the real. Indeed, it is the identity itself. The real is the one who knows, understands, and affirms in this form, and also the one who does not know, does not understand, and who denies in this other form. Whoever knows their self in this way knows their Lord, since he created them in his image. Indeed, he is the same as their identity and their reality." And in Arabic, the word for self, nafs, as in whoever knows their self knows their Lord, the word for self is written in the same way as the word for breath, nafas, because in Arabic you don't put in the vowels, you just have the consonants. So nafs and nafas is the same word, the word for self and for breath. And so in some contexts it can be read either way. And for example, in the whole of creation, Ibn Arabi says, is the breathing out of the breath of the all-compassionate, which releases the divine names and attributes, the divine names and attributes from the constriction of non-expression. So this breath is what breathes out into the divine names so that they're expressed in the world. So it's like a divine sigh that allows things to be expressed in the world. But this breath of the compassionate can be also read as the compassionate self, the nafs ar-Rahman or the nafas ar-Rahman. So we see that there is a constant transformation of forms with each breath, arising from the breath of the all-compassionate. For God is constantly creating, and the world is constantly in need of him for the preservation of its existence through his renewing it with every breath. So, as you know, the title of today's seminar is based on this short book, Know Yourself, and it's been given a lot of different titles in many, many different manuscripts. It's a very, very popular book, so it's been copied over and over again and been disseminated, and people have added different titles to it. But the title that nearly always has either as the title or as a subtitle on the explanation of the Prophet Muhammad, whoever knows their self knows their Lord. So that's what this book is basically about. So Ibn Arabi himself uses this quotation over and over again in all his books. He's constantly referring to it, which also again shows how important it is in his work. But I'd just like to say something else about self. I said something about self, but also about Lord. And the fact that you've turned up today, presumably you're interested in spiritual matters, or certainly in what reality is all about. And I think you've probably gathered from what I've said so far that for Ibn Arabi, the word God doesn't refer to any definite confined concept that any of us might have. It's far, far beyond that, something beyond anything that can be said about it. No relative person can describe the whole of reality. It is itself as it is. So nothing can be said about the absolute essence. But because there are many different levels of reality, at a certain level, as once we start to talk about the absolute essence, we're immediately defining it in some way. And as soon as you define something, you emphasize a certain aspect. So here we're beginning to enter into a realm of the Godhead or the divinity, where there's God, and then something needs to establish God as God, or there needs to be something or someone for whom God is a God. So we're immediately moving from something completely ineffable that cannot be confined or defined or constricted in any way, to something where there seems to be a sort of a duality coming about, because we're talking about God and the one who establishes God, and we can talk about the creator and the created, and the nourisher, for example, the divine name, the nourisher, which obviously is expressed in creation by anyone who is nourished or nourishes. There needs to be somebody hungry for the expression of that name so that they can be nourished. And any name you can think of, even names that might seem to be names of lack, like for the name forgiver, for example, to be expressed, there has to be somebody who demands to be forgiven. So all the attributes, all the names, all the expressions that can be expressed are expressed in the world through a name, through something that demands to be expressed in some way and requires an object. Yeah. So when we talk about the Lord, we're talking about a particular aspect of this relationship, our relationship with God. I just wanted to point out also that I think some of you might have read a book called The Kernel of the Kernels, attributed to Ibn Arabi, where he describes God and everything that is other than God. And of course, in reality, there is nothing other than God. But he describes it in terms of a sea and the waves. And although the waves are nothing other than the sea, the waves come up and be conceived as something individual, which then fall back into the sea. So the waves are nothing other than the sea, but at the same time, they're called that which is other, the other, because they have this certain individuality. So as soon as we start talking about God, as we've said, as opposed to the absolute divine essence which cannot be divided, the idea of a duality has been introduced. God and the world, the creation, the creatures, or the whole of existence, which can be regarded in that respect as other than God, meaning that aspect of each thing that's particular to it, even though essentially nothing can possibly be other than it. And our particular personal relationship that we have with this totality, with God, is called in Arabic Rabb, or Lord. And it's the unique way that the Absolute manifests itself to each of us, the face that God turns towards us, our direct personal connection with what is most real for us. And of course, ultimately, our Lord is the Lord of Lords, which is God, and that's Allah in Arabic. But each of us has a particular relationship with God, or with reality, which changes according to our needs, and which is what sustains, cherishes, and educates us. And in fact, in Arabic, the word for Lord, Rabb, means this: the cherisher, the sustainer, the educator. And it's that aspect of total reality which each human being serves. And as Bob Dylan once said, we all need to serve somebody or something for that matter. So anyone, even if they don't believe in God or talk about God, everyone is serving something from within themselves, which represents for them what's most valid in their lives in terms of reality. So to be called God, God requires something that establishes him as God. The Creator demands what is created. The Lord requires a servant. The nourisher can't be expressed without someone who is hungry, and the forgiver needs someone who asks for forgiveness. In his book, The Fusus al-Hikam, The Ringstones of Wisdom, Ibn Arabi writes, "If the essence was devoid of these attributes, it would not be a divinity. These attributes are brought about by us, and we make him God through establishing him as such.
He is not known until we are known. The prophet, peace upon him, said, "Whoever knows their self knows their Lord, and he of all creation knows God best." Some thinkers, including Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, have claimed that God can be known without considering the world. But this is a mistake. Certainly an eternal, pre-existing essence can be known, but it is not known as a divinity until that which depends on it is known, and which is a proof or sign of it. And that is why there is a concentration on the prophetic saying, "Whoever knows their self knows their Lord," because we can't know something that's distant from us, that is totally transcendent. We can only begin from where we are, from what is close to us. And Ibn Arabi points out how this saying, "Whoever knows their self knows their Lord," connects knowledge of the real with knowledge of the self, and adds the verse from the Quran, "We shall show them our signs on the horizons and in themselves until they see that it is the real." In this way, both what is apparently manifest outside of us on the horizons and what is hidden within us, that is, the visible and the invisible, are included in this knowledge. And so just to finish off, I'd just like to read a short quotation from Ibn Arabi's Book of Prayers, which explains how the inaccessibility, transcendence, and incomparability of God, who is beyond need of the world, is balanced by the intimacy, imminence, and similarity of God, who reveals himself in the whole of creation. And in the Sunday morning prayer, Ibn Arabi says, "How can I know you when you are the inwardly hidden who is not known? And how can I not know you when you are the outwardly manifest, making yourself known to me in everything?" Yes?
Do you think that anywhere within his writings, or certainly within the sections of the Book of Heart that you referred to, do you think Ibn Arabi ever addresses the fact that what's actually manifest within reality is also the things that we don't recognise as being beautiful? So, even within ourselves, somebody's disease or somebody's suffering or injustice, these sorts of elements of what's clearly manifest. Do you think he ever addresses what's quite often referred to as the problem of Eve, isn't it? That you see evil within the world, and yet the creation is the breathing of the divine. Does he?
Yeah, but
he ever addresses that?
He does, because obviously you have to, he talks about truth, and so you're not going to deny what you see and what's coming up within yourself either. Obviously we all have, because the human being is the summary of everything that is, all the names or attributes and qualities are expressed in the human being, and because of the opposition, the different names, you have, the Avenger and the Forgiver and the Creator and the Destroyer. It's the nature of the relative world that you're always going to have varying degrees of the names that are expressed. But he does say, for example, that there is the name light, but he says that there's no such thing as absolute darkness, because what we call darkness is only a relative lack of light. It's like degrees of it, but that it's all light, and without, an object which throws a shadow, you wouldn't get those distinctions. And although everything is one in being, it's those distinctions which bring out the detail of knowledge, if you like. So have to differentiate in knowledge. It's like the detailing of all the possible expressions of being, all the different attributes and qualities that are displayed. And if there's more of one attribute, there's less of another, if you like. So he does talk about it quite a lot. But he also takes very much the example of the Prophet Muhammad, who always saw the good in everything. So when it's a question of what do you focus on, where do you put your attention? Do you put it on the negative aspects of things, or do you put it on the positive aspect? That's not to deny all the injustices that happen in the world, because you have to be truthful about what a situation is, but you don't always understand necessarily all the intricate relationships of what's going on, and sometimes that doesn't come apparent till later, and sometimes one, in our limited understanding, we never know why certain things happen. But for him, it's a question of trust that actually the whole affair is under guidance, and everything is being arranged according to necessity.
It's a difficult truth to accept, isn't it, if a child is dying of cancer, that God is all merciful and compassionate, and this is simply beyond human understanding.
Yeah, there's a poem, a very moving poem that Ibn Arabi wrote about how he buried with his own hands his 7-year-old daughter. So it's not as though he himself, he was in lands where there was war, pestilence in Egypt, dreadful things going on. It's not as though he wasn't exposed to the realities of what can happen in the relative world, but he remained faithful to that kind of central part that we all have in our most interior. We all have something that's just very still and that goes beyond all the circumstantial things that are happening. That we have this possibility of a direct connection with something that is beyond all those opposites of expression, and it's a question of having certainty and trust and holding on to that, rather than, he's not saying don't feel compassion. And certainly one feels compassion for all the suffering and all the things that do happen in the world. At the same time, all those things are like ways that you're being true to that still point within you can be tested through trial, if you like. It's not you seek it, but that is actually what tends to happen in our journey through life. We all suffer in one way or another. But again, it's a question of whether you're always focusing on how much you're a victim of suffering, or other people are victims of suffering, and how much you're focusing on all the beneficence and all the wonderful gifts that are constantly given, and with every breath that we take, that we are in the swim of life.
It seems to be based on faith and trust, and that seems to me as a gift. If you don't have it, you don't have it. You may long to have it, but it seems to be very cozy to have it in some ways. If you don't have it, you don't have it. And then the whole thing actually falls apart.
Yeah, but at the same time, Ibn Arabi, and I think in one of the texts that we might get onto later on this afternoon, he says that every day God is in a different configuration. And this is a Quranic saying. And in the verse before that, it says that that people are constantly asking, they're constantly in need, and they're constantly asking him. And this question of that God always responds, or reality always responds to your demand. Whether or not that's granted immediately or whether it's good for you is another matter. But there's constant response to demand, so that although certainly you can never earn grace, it's something which is just completely given. At the same time, if you don't have that constant asking to be in that state of grace, then then there's even less possibility that it will be given to you. There's no guarantee in life that that your request for grace will be granted. But if you don't ask, you're unlikely to be granted it. It is, even if it's not a request in words, but just by your general state. If you're looking towards being receptive to blessing and grace, it's I know when people are in a dark place, it's very difficult to come into that. But it is like, if it's a constant request from something that is greater than yourself, rather than just allowing yourself to be stuck in a place, that can shift you into a more receptive state. Yeah?
I'm very interested in the duality aspect that you were talking about there. Creator, was it creator, created?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right, and forgiver, forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
But does he talk about how everything came into being through that separation, almost like creating duality, which I've heard about, but I'm trying to understand.
Well, I mean, I think it's explained. Ultimately, everything is one, completely one in being. He always says, when he talks about, he doesn't specifically talk about oneness of being in that with that particular phrase, but everything he says, and in fact, the religion of Islam is based on say God is one. It's to do with the fact that there is only one reality, and everything within that is an expression of a different aspect, or if you like, different aspects of that one reality being lit up. But he does, at a certain point, when things come into expression, he says, I was a hidden treasure. In other words, he was known only to himself, because there's no object there. There's only, when there's only one, without any differentiation whatsoever, it's known only within itself. Coming into expression, said, I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known. I loved to be known. So that's kind of also that impulse of love towards being known. To actually, so we've got this, we're coming to so I created the world. So now we've got a subject and an object, because I did mention that quotation at the beginning of Adam, the vision that a thing has of itself, in itself, is not the same as it has in something else that serves as a mirror for it. As we know, in ourselves we've got all kinds of different qualities, but it's only when we come into relationship, usually with somebody else, and we don't know necessarily how we're going to behave, what's going to come out of us, until we're in that situation where we're in relationship with other people. And then, all kinds of surprising things come out, and it's this sort of wonderful thing of what's inside suddenly being expressed and mirrored back. So there's this kind of mirroring. So inevitably, you've got subject-objects, you've got active and passive, and so that's, how he describes, I think, how all the different aspects in the realm of knowledge, which are sort of always present in potential but not actually expressed and known until there is expression, which you can call it being expressed in the world, or you could just think of it as a light which shines on different aspects, and it's very much up to our receptivity, how receptive we are as to what we display. And he's described it, and I think Rumi also described it somewhere as like, the sun shines. Well, we can't actually see it that well today because of the clouds, but the sun is shining, and all the houses have windows, and some of them have little tiny windows, and some of them have great big windows, and it depends on the place of perception as to how much of that light is shining in being reflected back in any one place. But he also talks about the importance of coming to know God, or to know reality, of that it is God, or the real, that unites between the opposites. So also, when he was talking about this kind of knowledge can never be known by the speculative thought, he's not dismissing the intellect, because he does. Muhammad himself, he quotes as saying, God first created my intellect. So the absolute intellect is extremely important. That is like the total knowledge. But as it manifests in a relative way, it's like a fetter, and the word in Arabic for intellect is akal, which is literally like a hobble on a camel or something like that, which ties you down, because it's always making these distinctions, whereas the heart, or the spiritual heart, is able to combine things which seem to be paradoxes, things that seem to be opposite, and by uniting between them come to a place where union is where it's more understood, if you like. Yeah.
What is it that isn't speculative knowledge then, do you think? So if language breaks things down, and language causes duality by virtue of breaking things up into parts, but what do you understand with an Arabi to be saying that is actually beyond speculative knowledge? Because I think, within our worldview, or some people's worldview, you can't move beyond the speculative in terms of knowledge, and as soon as you take a sort of apophatic type way, you say you can't break it into language, then some people will say, well, there's nothing there, is there? The only way you can render knowledge is through language and speculative thought. I wonder what you think of an Arabi actually meant by what was beyond the speculative.
Well, even Arabi himself, he wrote, as I explained, he wrote a vast amount. He's constantly writing, although he claims that it was inspired writing, but he manages to communicate through words, and that's one of his great gifts, that he had all these mystical experiences, what he calls unveiling, like unveiling of the heart, like when the curtains parted, doors of perception are cleansed, and something is just seen directly and known intuitively. And yet he is like that traveller who's been to a foreign place, and even though you haven't been there, he describes it and can communicate something of it to you through what he says. And we find this all the time, with words. People say things which don't actually, when you break down what they're saying, doesn't say very much, but somehow we communicate with each other. Somehow we might not, we can never totally experience what another person's feeling, but we can get a taste of it, in our communication. So this is really what he's talking about. It's something that actually, he does attempt to convey it in words, even though it can't be conveyed in words, and it's something completely direct, which directly, like the taste of honey. You can't describe it to anyone unless they've tasted it too. You can sort of tell it's a very sweet bit like jam, or you can say something similar. It's like when you smell a flower, perhaps you can smell it a little bit, or he can describe it, but until you've actually tasted it, and that's what he's talking about. It's direct knowledge, either of tasting like that, or of just knowing with the heart, really, which is rather than with this rational faculty. And even modern neuroscience kind of is aware that we actually have an awful lot of neurons in our heart. It's not just this kind of metaphorical talk that's been used all these years about the heart. That there are different ways of knowing and perceiving things. Yeah.
There was a program years ago with Carl Jung.
Yeah.
He was on Face to Face.
Oh yeah.
And the interviewers asked him a question: did he believe in God? And Jung said, "Believe? No, I know." So he knew, basically.
Yeah.
It's like